Shalom from Israel to all of the Daystar viewers around the world. I'm Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer and founder of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 25:5, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." And God says in Zechariah 8:16, "These are the things that you shall do. Speak out the truth to one another. Judge with truth and judgment to peace in your gates. And always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, Israel has sent a team of experts to help relief efforts in the flood-ravaged Austin, Texas area. This after President Barack Obama signed a disaster declaration for 70 counties in the Lone Star State. The Israel Forum for International Humanitarian Aid, known as IsraAid, is an umbrella organization of 35 different groups, ranging from youth movements to friendship societies, which respond to emergencies all over the world. IsraAid's executive director, Shachar Zahavi, announced that the team of 10 volunteers will be working to support the thousands of Texans impacted by the latest record-breaking storms that left death, injury, and destruction in their wake. This is not the first time IsraAid has lent a helping hand to Americans. The group also came to deliver disaster relief following Hurricanes Sandy in New York and Katrina in New Orleans, as well as deadly tornadoes in Oklahoma, wildfires in Washington State, and flooding in Denver and Detroit. IsraAid volunteers not only conduct search and rescue operations, but also help to rebuild communities through aid packages, medical assistance, post-trauma care, and provide microfinancing to help survivors receive benefits and restore their damaged businesses.
Amnesty International has issued a scathing report against Hamas, documenting its abduction, torture, and murder of scores of Palestinians last summer. According to the human rights organization, Hamas used its 50-day conflict with Israel to settle internal disputes with its rival Fatah partners in the so-called Palestinian Unity Government, including the public execution of many of the 23 known murder victims. Amnesty's Middle East and North African director Philip Luther says that Hamas is guilty of possible war crimes through its ruthless disregard for the most fundamental rules of international humanitarian law. Amnesty further argues that because no one has so far been held accountable for the crimes committed by Hamas forces against Palestinians during the 2014 conflict, it indicates that these crimes were either ordered or condoned by the authorities.
Israel scored a diplomatic victory in the unlikely arena of sports due to support from other countries at the Congress of the International Soccer Federation meeting in Zurich, Switzerland. The Palestinian Football Association dropped its motion to expel Israel from FIFA over claims that Arab players were being restricted from moving freely between Gaza and Israel's Judea and Samaria regions. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu commended the FIFA Congress for its action and said that Israel is interested in a peace that will ensure security for its citizens, but that peace cannot be achieved through coercion and distortion of the truth. He went on to say that as long as the Palestinians continue to take unilateral steps against Israel, they will only push peace further away instead of bringing it closer.
It is ironic that efforts to expel Israel from FIFA were launched by those who murdered Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics in 1972. That was the response from Israeli President Reuven Rivlin during the visit to Jerusalem of German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier. The German diplomat came to the Middle East on a 3-day state mission to explore ways to restart the peace process with the Palestinians. Rivlin asked Steinmeier to deliver a message during his subsequent meeting with Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah that the only way to end the conflict is through direct negotiations.
Many in the international community are condemning the decision by the United Nations to grant observer status to the Britain-based Palestinian Return Center. The radical group denies Israel's right to exist. The U.S., Israel, and Uruguay voted against the measure, which was passed by the UN Committee on Non-Governmental Organizations. Several of the committee's 19 members hold questionable records on human rights, including Iran, Pakistan, Sudan, Venezuela, Russia, and China. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Ron Prosser, said the decision to allow the PRC full access to UN facilities and participation in debates illustrates that this is the peak season for the UN's theater of the absurd. The Israeli diplomat added that according to this script, we may one day find Hezbollah sitting at the Security Council and ISIS voting at the Human Rights Council.
With just weeks to go before the deadline to reach a nuclear deal, top U.S. and Iranian diplomats are feverishly working to resolve remaining disputes. The major obstacles center on a timetable to lift economic sanctions on Tehran and how much access international inspectors will have to suspected atomic development at military facilities in the Islamic Republic. Right before he broke his leg in a cycling accident, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif held what Western officials say were the most substantive negotiations since the P5+1 world powers in Iran secured a framework pact in April. So far, an agreement has been reportedly reached on how to snap the punitive economic measures against Iran back into place if the regime is caught violating the prospective final agreement that is aimed at ensuring that over the next decade, Tehran will remain at least a year away from nuclear bomb-making capability.
There has been widespread shock following the discovery that more than 130 Nazi war criminals, SS guards, and others affiliated with the Third Reich have collected more than $20 million in retirement benefits from American taxpayer money. The startling information was made public by the Associated Press after obtaining a copy of a report by the Inspector General of the Social Security Administration. At least a quarter of the money was given to individuals who were actually deported from the United States after being found guilty of having direct involvement in atrocities committed during the Second World War. In addition, $14 million went to suspects who were alleged or found to have assisted the Nazis at a time when 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust. Following another AP investigation 7 months ago, Congress swiftly passed legislation to close a legal loophole used by the Justice Department to offer Nazi suspects Social Security payments if they agreed to leave the U.S. voluntarily.
The organizer of the recent Freedom of Speech rally in Phoenix has reportedly gone into hiding for his own safety and that of his family. John Ritzheimer says that there have been calls for his beheading after he spoke out against tyranny and terrorism right here in America. The former Marine and Iraqi war veteran says that there is no middle ground when it comes to Islam, which he insists is a violent religion. About 200 others, angered over the threat posed by Muslim militancy in the United States, joined the march to the Islamic Community Center in Phoenix, whose members include both terrorists who opened fire with assault rifles outside a Prophet Muhammad cartoon drawing contest in Garland, Texas a month ago. Both of the Phoenix Muslims were killed in the shootout with police. Despite having to seek shelter for his life, Ritzheimer said that no one asked the Founding Fathers if it was worth it for them to put their lives on the line in signing the Declaration of Independence, and that when efforts are made to oppress American citizens, they will fight back.
Violent extremism was also the topic of talk at a special session convened by the United Nations Security Council. Members met with Interpol agents to discuss ways of working together to combat terrorism around the world. In his address, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon detailed the participation of more than 25,000 foreign terrorist fighters from over 100 member nations affiliated with al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, who are now engaged in Islamist warfare in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, and Pakistan. The session was led by Lithuanian Foreign Minister Linas Linkevičius, who warned that no country in the world can consider itself safe from the threat of foreign terrorist fighters, and the worst possible choice would be to wait until it happens.
In other efforts to combat increasing Islamization, the International Coalition Against the Islamic State held a critical meeting in Paris. 24 state ministers and representatives of international organizations reviewed strategies to obstruct further advances by the radical jihadists in Syria and Iraq, including discussions on the military coalition against the group being led by the United States. The session was to have been co-chaired by French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius and John Kerry, although the American Secretary of State had to cancel his appearance after breaking his femur in his cycling accident and instead participated by telephone.
Meanwhile, ISIS appears to be gaining strength in the Gaza Strip. Hamas forces killed a 27-year-old supporter of the Islamic State in Gaza City this past week after he refused orders to surrender. The fatality came as ISIS gave Hamas a 48-hour ultimatum to end its crackdown and release dozens of ISIS loyalists who were taken into custody following numerous bombing attacks on Hamas security posts. According to Egyptian media, the demand came from a leader of the Islamic State's military wing operating inside Gaza, who plans to coordinate strikes against Hamas with ISIS-affiliated terrorists based in the neighboring Sinai Peninsula. He then threatened that the combined forces intend to launch a mega-terror attack in Israel's southern resort city of Eilat, including a strike targeting its port on the Red Sea. Islamic State supporters have also issued a claim of responsibility for the missile fired at Israel from Gaza late last month.
The Polish Parliamentary Israel Allies Caucus was just inaugurated in Warsaw, marking the first time such an organization has ever been founded in the East European nation. The pro-Israel lobby group aims to generate greater support for the Jewish state through the shared Judeo-Christian values the two countries hold. Members of the Israel Allies Foundation and representatives from the World Jewish Congress met with political and religious leaders from both nations during the launch of the 32nd Israel Allies Caucus in Poland. The Israeli delegation includes Knesset Christian Allies Caucus Director Josh Reinstein, who said that this is an important moment for faith-based diplomacy. He went on to say that 70 years after the Holocaust, we must turn the bulk of our efforts toward mobilizing support for Israel. Israel is the only guarantor of the Jewish people's survival.
At least 30,000 supporters of Israel marched up Fifth Avenue in New York City this past week in a show of love and support for the Jewish state. The 51st annual Celebrate Israel Parade also featured musical performances and the appearance of several Israeli and American leaders, including New York's Mayor Bill de Blasio, who joined participants by dancing in the street during the all-day occasion to honor Israel on its 67th birthday. In a videotaped greeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu offered his blessings and said he salutes those who salute Israel, which stands out in the turbulent region of the Middle East as a beacon of freedom and human rights and a model for tolerance and diversity.
Unseasonably high temperatures in Israel have sent residents and their furry friends in search of ways to keep cool. Bears and elephants at Jerusalem's Biblical Zoo jumped into ponds to avoid overheating during what was the first time that two major heat waves were documented in May since the 1970s. The critters also cooled off with chilled chunks of watermelon and even seemed to enjoy ice cubes of frozen vegetables. Children frolicked in water fountains overlooking the old city, having great fun in very modern ways against the dramatic backdrop of the biblical and ancient civilization. Thousands of other Israelis and tourists alike made their way to the country's beautiful beaches along the shoreline, where they enjoyed the sunny blue skies and sparkling waters of the Mediterranean Sea. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host Josh Reinstein, and we're here on a beautiful day in Jerusalem on our rooftop studio. My guest today is Tricia Miller. She's the Senior Research Analyst at CAMRA. Tricia, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tricia, tell our viewers a little about what is CAMRA.
CAMRA is the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, and it's a media monitoring organization. We monitor English media, British media, Spanish media, Hebrew media, anything that has to do with Israel and the Middle East.
And recently they've opened up a Christian department. Why is it so important for Christians to know about media coverage on Israel?
Because in the Christian world there has been a lot of activity that's gone against Israel, especially in recent years. In the evangelical world, there's been a narrative coming out of Bethlehem in particular that is anti-Israel. And so Christians need to know the errors and the falsehood in that narrative.
And also we see that there's a lot of bias in the media. Why do you think the media is so biased against the only free democracy in the Middle East?
That's a very good question. There's a complete double standard when it comes to dealing with Israel in the media.
You know, you're also not just a research analyst at CAMRA, but you're an author, and you just had a book come out recently. Tell us about the book.
The book, the title is Jews and Anti-Judaism in Esther and the Church. It's based on my PhD work on Esther. And in this book, I apply what I did in that work on Esther in the history of anti-Semitism and apply it to current Christian anti-Zionism in relation to Israel.
You know, it's interesting because I didn't know this until I saw the book, but you're saying that the book of Esther has been traditionally used by Christian church, mainline Christian church, as a way of promoting anti-Semitism. Tell me a little bit about that.
There's the historical interpretation of the book of Esther is really based on two Greek versions that were written of the version after the original Hebrew, but the traditional Christian interpretation has been that it's an ungodly book because God's not mentioned, and that Jews like to battle and kill people and then have a party. And so I did the dissertation to show that that's not what's happening in the book of Esther. It's all about self-defense.
It's very interesting. You know, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is that Christianity or Christian Zionism, which we think of as a modern phenomenon, is actually something that's rooted in Christianity over 2,000 years ago. Can you explain that idea?
Ever since the beginning of the church, there have been Christians who believed that the Jews would be returned to this land, to their land, as prophesied by the Hebrew prophets. And so there's a 2,000-year historical basis, and there's also a solid theological basis for Christian Zionism that's 2,000 years old and is not rooted in the more recent phenomenon that's based on the eschatology and dispensationalism.
Well, we see a lot of our viewers consider themselves Christian Zionists, and we've seen the rise of Christian Zionism and its influence here in Israel. But people are concerned that Christian Zionism might start dwindling in its numbers because of a new type of theology based on Jesus being a martyr, being a Palestinian suicide bomber, for lack of a better phrase. Mm-hmm. Where is that coming from?
One of the main perpetrators of this is coming from Bethlehem Bible College and Christ at the Checkpoint conferences, which are every other year. The conferences are sponsored by Bethlehem Bible College, and they are using their own form of replacement theology. Traditional replacement theology says that the church has replaced the Jews and Israel and the purposes of God. And their version of it is that they are the original people in the land. The Jews only came in the 1800s. So historically, they've rewritten everything historically, and they are corrupting scripture by then claiming that Jesus was a Palestinian.
It's very odd for us being in Israel, being the only place where Christians are free to worship in the Middle East, the only place where the number of Christians grow and not decrease, to see a place where Christians are so harmed and so attacked and always scared to even talk about their faith, like the Palestinian Authority, for them to pretend that they're now the champions of Christian rights. How do people, how do you juxtapose that?
Well, they're not. The Christian population of Bethlehem has gone down drastically. It used to be a predominantly Christian city, and it's very, very small now, and it's because of the persecution from the PA, from the Muslim authorities.
Well, we know a lot from the times of the former Soviet Union that if there's someone speaking for a dictatorship, there's someone not far behind him with a Kalashnikov rifle pointed at his back. Are there also Christians who are brave enough to come out in Bethlehem and tell the real story?
Yes, there are. There are a few, and they tell about the persecution. They tell about the threats, the dangers to their families, killings, beatings, churches being burned. Yes.
Trish, there are literally tens of millions of people watching the show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, first, I'd like you to know about CAMRA as a resource and go to the website. There's a wealth of material there, a lot of archived articles that give you the facts. They're carefully researched about all the issues in the Middle East. You can search for any topic or any issue and find facts.
Thank you, Trish, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, shining light from Israel.
thing that really characterizes this bridge is that no one is indifferent to it. Many people love it, some people hate it, but no one is indifferent to it.
I use it every day. It means I don't have to go on the road, so I feel safe. It's like King David's harp, and it's a significant monument in Jerusalem.
Jerusalem needs modern architecture, but it adds value to it. Modern and antiquity fits very well.
It's really like a harp, and every time when I walk, past this bridge, I'm thinking of, I'm walking through a historical architecture.
It reminds me somewhat of a sailboat, a big, tall sailing ship, actually, and yet with the light rail going by, then it kind of reminds me of space age. So it's kind of a nice mix.
It's a new icon near the old icon, it's a symbol to the movement of Jerusalem from old city to international city. If the simple people and the tourists come and they take picture of the bridge, after they taking picture in the Kotel on the old city, so it's definitely come to be a new icon in Jerusalem. And it's the first steps to make Jerusalem international city.
There is a plan for intensive development, for very tall buildings, a traffic hub where two lines of the light rail will meet. The heavy rail coming from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem will arrive at that point, and there will be tall office buildings and hotels in that precinct. It somehow creates a new pattern for how we look at the way we move around in our city and how we look at our landscape.
Please stay tuned for the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Welcome to the ICJ Report. My name is Juha Ketala and I'm the International Director of our ministry. The Lord has called us both to Israel and to the nations. That's why we have our headquarters here in Jerusalem. You can see our building here behind me. And in the nations, we have our national branches. Now we as a ministry, we are like a funnel, like a pipe with a wide opening to channel the support and help from the nations into the lives of the individual citizens in Israel. We have had our physical presence here in Jerusalem since 1980. In our headquarters here in Jerusalem, we have a staff of about 40 people from more than 12 different nations. And from here, we are spreading out to all Israel. And the Lord has enabled us to touch the different layers of the Israeli society. We have been doing it, and we are doing it either by our ICEJ aid social assistance programs and projects that are going to the north and south and east and west of Israel, or we are doing the touching of the layers of the Israeli society by our partnerships with many different various institutes here in Israel. Among them, for example, the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, enabling us to touch the national leadership of Israeli nation, the modern day Israel. Or we have a partnership with the Yad Vashem, the most prestigious, very well-known institute in Israel, the Holocaust Museum and the Educational Center. Now, this is what we are doing in Israel. Now, in the nations then, and this is vitally important, very, very important. In the nations, we are serving the body of Christ. Our message nourishes, it builds trust in the spirit of the believers. When we show from the Bible and from the history how God has been so faithful to the Israelites and the modern day Israelis. The Israelis are back in the modern day state of Israel here in the land. God is forever faithful. So we are serving the local body of Christ with our message. But we are doing more than that. We are raising a global prayer on behalf of Israel in the nations. And we are also raising some other kind of support in the nations. And we do this by reaching out to the national leaders and the decision makers in the countries. We are speaking on behalf of Israel and raising understanding of the Israelis and what kind of situations they have in the land. You need to be part of this. Within the last year alone, we were in more than 30 nations, almost 30 nations, from Israel, from Jerusalem. And this is in addition to what the national branches have been doing in more than 70 nations. We have been establishing new branches within the last year. In November last year, we had a new branch we established in Sierra Leone, then in February in Senegal, and in Niger, and then in May in Slovenia. So we have new branches. We have a vision to reach out to the Muslim countries. The Lord prophesied over us that we will establish 10 new branches in the Muslim countries. China is opening for us. Spanish-speaking world is opening for us. In Africa alone, we have more than 20 nations to go into. You need to get involved. Do something practical. Click the donation button on our website and learn where you can put your monies in to support the ministry. Actions prevail over mere knowledge. Write a check. Pray for us. Remember, we are your embassy here in Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.